3 years ago, Rhea Calder watched her sister bleed out on cold palace stone, murdered for knowing too much. The killers came for Rhea next, but she vanished into the wilderness, becoming a ghost the kingdom forgot. Now, starving and desperate, she's made a fatal mistake, slipping into the capital during the Alpha King's parade. She plans to steal food and disappear before anyone notices. But when King Auric Thornvale's procession thunders past, the most dangerous man in the realm suddenly stops. His wolf-sharp gaze cuts through 10,000 faces and finds the one person trying hardest to hide. If you want to see how a hunted woman becomes the kingdom's only hope, stay until the end, like this video, and comment which city you're watching from. The autumn wind carried the scent of roasting chestnuts and spiced cider through the capital's crowded streets, but Rhea Calder smelled only danger. She pressed herself against the cold stone wall of a baker's shop, hood pulled low, fingers trembling as she clutched the stolen loaf of bread beneath her cloak. 3 years of survival in the frontier forest had taught her to recognize threats the way wolves recognize blood, by instinct, by the prickling sensation crawling up her spine, by the way her heart hammered against her ribs like a prisoner begging for release. Today, every instinct screamed at her to run. The royal parade stretched down the Avenue of Kings like a river of silk and steel. Thousands packed the cobblestone streets, nobles in their fine velvets elbowing common folk for a better view. Children perched on fathers' shoulders, merchants hawking ribbons and flags bearing the Thornvale crest, a silver wolf's head crowned with northern stars. The noise was overwhelming after years of forest silence. Cheers, drums, the rhythmic clatter of armored horses, the bright peal of trumpets announcing the approach of the king himself. Rhea had planned this carefully. She'd entered the city at dawn when the gates were chaos, slipped through the crowd during the parade when every guard's attention would be on the procession, stolen what she needed from distracted vendors, and would vanish before the celebration ended. Simple, clean, the way she'd survived for 36 months without being caught. Except nothing was simple anymore. "Make way for His Majesty!" The herald's voice boomed over the crowd. "King Auric Thornvale, Alpha of the North, Defender of the Realm, approaches." The roar that followed was deafening. Rhea flinched, pressing harder against the wall. The parade's vanguard appeared, 200 mounted knights in polished armor, their horses stepping in perfect formation, swords drawn and held upright in salute. Behind them came the royal guard, grim-faced warriors chosen not for their noble blood, but for their ability to kill without hesitation. Then came the king. Even from her hiding spot, even with her hood pulled low and her gaze averted, Rhea felt the weight of his presence like a physical thing. King Auric Thornvale rode a midnight black destrier that stood a full hand taller than any horse around it. He wore no crown, the Alpha Kings of the North never did. But he needed no symbol of authority. Power radiated from him like heat from forge fire. He was younger than the tyrant Rhea had imagined during her years in exile. Perhaps 30, with the dark hair that fell just past his collar and a face carved from granite and hard choices. Scars marked his jaw and the back of his right hand where it rested on his sword hilt. His eyes, even at this distance, Rhea could see their color, were the pale gold of a wolf's, cold and calculating, the eyes of a predator who had never known fear. The crowd surged forward, desperate for a closer look. Rhea let herself be pushed deeper into the press of bodies, using the chaos as cover. Just a few more minutes, just long enough for the parade to pass, for attention to shift, for the guards to relax their posts. Then she would slip away to the eastern gate, back to the forest, back to the brutal but honest life of hiding and surviving and never, ever letting anyone see her face. "Long live the king!" someone shouted. "The Alpha King!" Another voice joined in, and soon the chant rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. "The Alpha King! The Alpha King!" Rhea's fingers tightened on the bread. Her sister had died in this city, died in the palace that rose like a mountain of white stone beyond the parade route, died on floors walked by nobles who smiled and plotted and killed anyone who threatened their power. The king himself had been part of that world. For all the crowd's adulation, for all the propaganda about his strength and justice, he was just another powerful man in a city built on lies. The procession slowed. At first, Rhea thought it was just the natural rhythm of ceremony. Pause for the crowd to cheer. Let the commoners feel close to royalty. maintain the illusion that kings cared about their subjects. But the slowing continued. The mounted knights ahead shifted uncertainly. The herald's voice faltered mid-announcement. Then the king stopped completely. His destrier halted in the center of the avenue, directly across from where Rhea hid. The animal snorted and stamped, as if sensing its rider's sudden tension. The noise of the crowd began to fade, confusion rippling outward as people realized something was wrong. Rhea felt it before she understood it, the weight of attention, the focused intensity of a hunter who had caught a scent. Her breath stopped. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Every survival instinct she'd honed over 3 years of running screamed a single word: hide. But it was too late. King Eric Thornvale turned in his saddle, those wolf gold eyes scanning the crowd with predatory precision. He was looking for something, someone. His gaze swept across faces, dismissing merchants and nobles and children with equal indifference, searching. His eyes locked onto hers. The world narrowed to that single point of contact. Rhea couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't think past the animal terror flooding her veins. He saw her. Through the hood, through the crowd, through 3 years of careful invisibility, he saw her. The king's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture: recognition, certainty, the stillness of a wolf that had found its prey. He raised one hand, a simple gesture, and the entire parade ground to a halt. You. His voice cut through the silence like a blade through silk, carrying authority that made hardened knights straighten and common folk drop their gazes. But he wasn't looking at them. He was looking at Rhea. Don't run. It was the worst possible thing to say. Rhea ran. She shoved through the crowd with desperate strength, ignoring the shouts of protest, the hands grabbing at her cloak. Behind her, she heard orders being barked, the clatter of armor as guards mobilized. She didn't look back. Looking back meant hesitation, and hesitation meant death. The side streets of the capital were a maze she'd memorized during sleepless nights in the forest, sketched in her mind from childhood memories before everything fell apart. She ducked into an alley between a tavern and a Fletcher's shop, boots skidding on wet cobblestones. The passage was barely wide enough for her shoulders. Behind her, heavier footsteps echoed. Guards in full armor couldn't follow as easily, but they would spread out, cut off escape routes, trap her like a fox in a warren. She burst out into a smaller street, nearly colliding with a woman carrying laundry. The woman screamed. Rhea kept running, taking another turn, then another, heading east toward the older part of the city where buildings pressed close and shadows offered cover. Her lungs burned. 3 years of frontier survival had made her strong, but running on wild roots and stolen scraps wasn't the same as proper food. Her legs felt like lead, her vision starting to blur at the edges. Still she ran, because stopping meant capture, and capture meant the same fate as her sister: blood on stone, secrets silenced, another inconvenient truth buried in an unmarked grave. She ducked under a low archway into what looked like an abandoned courtyard. Crumbling statues of forgotten nobles stood among weeds, their stone faces worn smooth by decades of rain. A fountain sat dry and broken in the center. The walls rose 3 stories on all sides, old merchant houses long since converted to storage or left to rot. It was a dead end. Rhea spun, chest heaving, searching for another exit. There, a drainage grate in the corner, half hidden by debris. If she could pry it open, squeeze through. "I told you not to run!" The voice came from the archway. King Eric Thornvale stood silhouetted against the light, alone. He'd shed his formal parade cloak and come on foot, moving with the silent grace of a hunter who'd tracked prey through worse terrain than city streets. His hand rested on his sword hilt, but he hadn't drawn the blade. Yet. Rhea backed toward the fountain, mind racing. "Stay back. You have 10 seconds to explain why the kingdom's most wanted fugitive just appeared in my capital." His voice was calm, controlled, but underneath ran a current of barely leashed violence. "Why I shouldn't arrest you right now for treason and conspiracy." "I didn't." Her voice cracked. She hadn't spoken to another human in months, and fear made the words stick in her throat. "I didn't do anything. I just needed food." "You disappeared 3 years ago, the same night your sister was murdered, in my palace." He took a step forward. "The same night documents exposing a noble conspiracy went missing. The same night half my court was thrown into chaos." And you expect me to believe you just needed food? Rhea's back hit the fountain's edge. Nowhere left to run. I didn't take any documents. I didn't know about any conspiracy. The memory flashed through her mind, sharp as broken glass. Her sister's study, blood pooling on the floor, the desperate whisper of run, Rhea, run before the light left her eyes. I just saw my sister die. Something flickered across the king's face, too quick to read. Who killed her? I don't know. I didn't see their face. I just heard voices, and then her breath hitched. And then she was bleeding, and she told me to run, and I ran. For 3 years. Because whoever killed her wanted me dead, too. The words burst out, 3 years of terror and grief and rage finally breaking through. Because this city is full of vipers who smile while they sharpen their knives. Because trusting anyone with power is how you end up like my sister, dead. Silence fell across the courtyard. The king studied her with those unsettling gold eyes, and Rhea realized with cold certainty that he was deciding whether to kill her himself or drag her back for a public execution. Then he did something she didn't expect. He removed his hand from his sword and held both palms up, empty, in a gesture of peace. Your sister's name was Rhea Calder. She was the palace archivist. 3 years ago, she uncovered evidence that Lord Cassian Vire was embezzling crown funds and plotting to assassinate me during the winter solstice celebration. His voice softened, just slightly. She brought that evidence to me personally, 2 hours before she died. Rhea's world tilted. What? Lysa saved my life and exposed a conspiracy that would have destroyed the kingdom. She died because Vire discovered she'd betrayed him. The king took another careful step forward, moving like someone approaching a wounded animal. With her last breath, she made me swear an oath. She made me promise I would find you and keep you safe. No. Rhea shook her head, even as tears burned behind her eyes. No, you're lying. You're trying to trick me into what? Coming back to the palace where you'd be protected? His tone sharpened with frustration. I've had search parties scouring the frontier for 3 years. Do you have any idea how many resources I've wasted trying to honor a promise to a dead woman? Then stop. The tears came now, hot and angry. Stop looking for me. Let me go. I don't want your protection or your promises or anything to do with this cursed city. Too late. The king's expression hardened. Cassian Vire escaped execution. He's been hiding in the eastern provinces, building an army, searching for something, or someone, that will give him the power to take my throne. 3 months ago, my spies intercepted a message. He's looking for you, Rhea. Specifically, you. Ice flooded her veins. Why? I don't know anything. I didn't see... It's not what you know. He moved closer, and this time she was too shocked to retreat. It's what you are. Your bloodline carries something Vire wants. Something he's willing to burn the kingdom to obtain. My bloodline? Rhea laughed, brittle and broken. We were archivists, scholars. We had no power, no wealth, no... Your mother was a Calder. Your father was a bastard son of House Rain, a line that traces back to the first kings of the north, before the realm was unified. The king's voice dropped lower. Vire believes your blood carries the old magic, the kind that hasn't been seen in centuries. The kind that can tear open rifts between worlds, summon forces that shouldn't exist, reshape reality itself. The courtyard spun. Rhea grabbed the fountain's edge to keep from falling. That's insane. Magic like that is it's stories, legends. It doesn't it? The king's gaze pinned her like a butterfly to cork. Have you ever felt it? A surge of power when you're angry or afraid? A moment when the air around you crackles and reality bends? She wanted to say no, wanted to deny everything, but memory betrayed her. The night she'd fought off a pack of frontier wolves, when desperation had turned to fury and the air itself had seemed to ignite around her. The wolves had fled, whimpering. She told herself it was fear, coincidence, anything but what it felt like, power, raw and ancient, responding to her will. Her silence was answer enough. The king nodded slowly. Cassian Vire killed your sister because she stood between him and the throne. Now he's hunting you because your power could give him godhood or destroy him utterly. Either way, you're the key to everything. He extended his hand, palm up, an offering, not a demand. Come back with me. Let me honor my promise to Lysa. Let me protect you until we can end this." Rhea stared at that outstretched hand. 3 years ago, she'd trusted the nobility, believed in the safety of palace walls and the honor of powerful men. That trust had gotten her sister killed, but staying in the forest meant running forever. It meant waiting for Vyre's hunters to find her, alone and unprepared. It meant dying the same way Lysa had, bleeding out with secrets still locked inside her. "If I come back," she said slowly, "and this is a trap, if you're working with Vyre, or if you plan to use me the way he wants to, then you'll kill me." The king's smile was sharp as broken glass. "I've seen what you did to those wolves, Rhea. The forest talks. If I betray you, I don't think chains or crowns will save me from whatever you've become." It wasn't a comforting promise, but it was an honest one. Rhea took his hand. His grip was warm, calloused from sword practice, surprisingly gentle for a man who'd built his reputation on ruthlessness. He pulled her to her feet, steady and certain, and for the first time in 3 years, Rhea felt the weight of isolation begin to crack. "There are rules," she said, voice still shaking. "I'm not your prisoner. I'm not your weapon. And if I find out you're lying, I know." He released her hand but didn't step away. "You'll disappear again, and I'll spend another 3 years searching, or you'll put a knife in my throat. Either way, I lose the only chance I have to stop Vyre before he drowns the kingdom in blood." Behind them, footsteps echoed in the alley. The royal guard, finally catching up. The king turned, raising one hand in a signal that made the soldiers stop at the archway, confused but obedient. "Your Majesty," the captain's voice carried uncertainty. "The fugitive, is under my personal protection." King Arik's tone left no room for argument. "Spread the word. Rhea Calder is a guest of the crown. Anyone who harms her answers to me." The captain's eyes widened, but he saluted crisply. "Yes, Your Majesty." As the guards retreated, Rhea felt the reality of her decision settling over her like a physical weight. She was going back to the palace, back to the place where her sister had died, back to the center of power and conspiracy and all the things she'd sworn to never trust again. The king seemed to sense her hesitation. "I won't lie to you, Rhea. The palace is full of people who will see you as a threat or a tool. Half the court thinks your sister was a traitor who fabricated evidence against Vyre. The other half knows the truth but resents the chaos her revelation caused." He met her gaze squarely. "You'll be safer than in the forest, but you won't be comfortable." "I haven't been comfortable in 3 years. "No." Something almost like respect crossed his features. "I don't suppose you have." They walked back through the city streets in silence, Rhea acutely aware of the stares that followed them, the fearsome alpha king walking beside a ragged woman in a threadbare cloak. Word would spread quickly. By nightfall, every noble house would know that the Calder girl had returned. And somewhere in the eastern provinces, Cassian Vyre would hear the news and begin moving his pieces into position. The palace rose before them, white stone glowing in the afternoon sun, beautiful and terrible as a sword's edge. Rhea's steps slowed as they approached the gates, memory flooding back. Running through these corridors at age 12, visiting Lysa at work, marveling at the tapestries and the grandeur and the shining promise of a world where knowledge and truth mattered. That world had been a lie. She loved this place, Rhea said quietly. Lysa. She believed the palace was where history was preserved, where truth was protected, right up until the end. The king paused at the gate. She wasn't wrong. The palace is where truth is protected. It's also where truth gets people killed. He looked at her directly. That's why I need you to be smart as well as strong. Don't trust anyone completely. Not the nobles, not the guards, not even me. Trust your instincts. They've kept you alive this long. It was the most honest thing anyone in power had ever said to her. The gates swung open. Beyond lay the palace grounds. Manicured gardens, marble fountains, courtyards where knights trained and nobles schemed. And somewhere in those glittering halls, the conspiracy that had killed her sister still festered, waiting for the chance to strike again. Rhea stepped through the gates, and the weight of destiny settled across her shoulders, like a crown she'd never wanted. 3 years ago, she'd been a frightened girl who ran from danger. Now she was walking straight into the heart of it, armed with nothing but the promise of a king she barely trusted and a power she didn't understand. But she wasn't running anymore. And that, she realized as the gates closed behind her with the finality of a tomb ceiling, was either the bravest or the stupidest thing she'd ever done. The palace corridors remembered her. Rhea felt it in the way the marble floors echoed her footsteps with the same rhythm they had when she was 12, visiting Lysa during summer festivals. She felt it in the scent of beeswax candles and old parchment that still clung to the air, unchanged despite 3 years of absence. But most of all, she felt it in the stairs. Servants who'd once smiled at the archivist's little sister now watched her with something between pity and suspicion, as if she were a ghost returned to haunt the living. King Arik led her through the eastern wing without ceremony, his stride purposeful but not rushed. Guards snapped to attention as they passed, their eyes tracking Rhea like wolves assessing a wounded deer. She kept her chin up, refusing to show the fear churning in her gut. 3 years in the frontier had taught her that predators could smell weakness. "The East Tower," the king said as they climbed a spiral staircase worn smooth by centuries of use. "It's isolated, defensible, and far enough from the court quarters that you won't have nobles watching your every move." He glanced back at her. "It's also where your sister lived." Rhea's steps faltered. "You're putting me in her rooms? I'm giving you a choice." He stopped on the landing, his expression unreadable. "Lysa's chambers have been sealed since her death. No one's touched them. If you'd prefer different quarters—" "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. "No, I'll stay there." Something in his gaze softened, just fractionally. "I thought you might say that." The door to Lisa's chambers stood at the end of a quiet hallway, unmarked except for the royal seal pressed into the lock. The king's personal sigil, marking it as territory under his direct protection. Arik produced a key from his belt and turned it with a soft click that seemed too loud in the silence. The door swung open, and Rhea's breath caught. Everything was exactly as she remembered. The writing desk by the window, still covered with Lysa's neat stacks of books and scrolls. The tapestry of the northern forests hanging above the fireplace, a gift from their mother before she died. Even the teacup on the side table, half full of liquid long since evaporated to a brown stain at the bottom. It was as if Lysa had simply stepped out for a moment and would return any second, complaining about some obscure historical inconsistency she'd discovered in the archives. But she wouldn't return. She would never return. "I'll have servants bring fresh linens and food," Arik said quietly. "The council meets at sunset. You're not required to attend, but if you want to understand what we're facing, I'll be there." Rhea moved into the room, fingers trailing across the desk's surface. Dust came away on her skin. "If Vire is really coming for me, I need to know everything." The king nodded. "There's a bath through that door. Clean clothes in the wardrobe. They were Lysa's, but you're about the same size." He hesitated at the threshold. "Rhea, what I said before about not trusting anyone. That includes the council. Most of them are loyal, but Vire had allies in the court. Some of them are still here, still working in the shadows." "How do I know you're not one of them?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "You don't. But if I wanted you dead or captured, I had plenty of chances in that courtyard. Sometimes you have to gamble on trust, even when the odds are terrible." He left before she could respond, the door closing with a soft finality that left her alone with her sister's ghost. Rhea stood in the center of the room for a long moment, breathing in the familiar scent of old books and lavender soap. Then slowly, she moved to the desk and began searching through the papers. If Lysa had uncovered evidence of Vire's conspiracy, maybe she'd left other clues. Maybe something here would explain why a traitor was hunting a girl with no power, no wealth, nothing but a bloodline she didn't understand. The papers were mostly mundane: archive inventory lists, historical research notes, letters from colleagues at other libraries. But underneath the surface clutter, Rhea found a leather journal bound with a lock that had been forced open, the metal bent and twisted as if someone had pried it apart in a hurry. Her sister's handwriting filled the pages, small and precise. Rhea's hands shook as she flipped through entries dating back 4 years, charting Lysa's research into House Vire's finances. The early entries were dry, academic, but as the months progressed, the tone shifted. Found another discrepancy in the tax records. Vire is moving money through merchant fronts in the eastern provinces. The amounts are staggering, enough to fund a private army. Confronted Lord Harlan about the falsified trade agreements. He denied everything, of course, but he looked afraid. Not of me, of whoever he's protecting. I think they know I'm digging. Someone went through my office last night. Nothing taken, but the papers were disturbed. A warning, perhaps. I should stop. But if Vire is planning what I think he's planning... The entries grew more desperate, more urgent, and then, 3 days before her death. I was right. Veer isn't just stealing gold, he's funding a coup, the winter solstice celebration when the king will be vulnerable. I have to tell someone. But who can I trust? Half the court is in Vire's pocket. If I go to the wrong person, I'm dead. I told Auric, the king himself. He believed me. Thank the old powers, he believed me. He's moving against Vire tonight, but I'm afraid it's too late. Vire's people are everywhere. I need to get Rhea out of the city before... The entry ended mid-sentence, the ink smudged as if the pen had been dropped in haste. Rhea closed the journal, tears blurring her vision. Lysa had died trying to protect her, had used her last moments to make the king swear an oath, to ensure that even in death, her little sister would be safe. The weight of that sacrifice pressed down like a physical thing. A knock at the door shattered the moment. Rhea wiped her eyes quickly, shoving the journal into her cloak. Come in. A servant girl entered, barely 16, carrying an armload of linens. She kept her eyes down, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone used to being invisible. The king sent me to prepare your rooms, my lady. I'm not a lady. Yes, my... The girl caught herself, flushing. Sorry, old habits. Rhea studied her. What's your name? Mira. The girl set the linens on the bed, still not meeting Rhea's gaze. I'm one of the tower servants. I'll be bringing your meals and tending the fire, if that's acceptable. Did you know my sister? Mira's hand stilled on the sheets. For a moment she said nothing. Then quietly, everyone knew Lady Lysa. She was kind. She used to sneak books to the servants who wanted to learn reading. Some of the nobles complained, said she was putting ideas above our station, but she didn't stop. The girl's voice dropped to barely a whisper. When she died, half the palace wept. The other half pretended to. Which half are you? Mira finally looked up, and Rhea saw tears shining in her eyes. I wept, miss, and I still do sometimes, when I pass the archives and remember she'll never be there again. The honesty of it struck Rhea like a blow. She'd spent 3 years believing she was the only one who mourned Lysa, the only one who remembered, but grief had touched others too, in quieter ways. Thank you, Rhea said softly, for telling me that. Mira nodded and went back to her work, this time with a little less tension in her shoulders. They worked in companionable silence for a while, Rhea sorting through Lysa's belongings while Mira prepared the rooms. It felt strange, domestic almost, after so long alone. Then Mira spoke again, hesitant. Miss, there's something you should know. About tonight's council meeting. Rhea turned. What about it? The nobles have been arguing for days about whether to recall the frontier legions. Lord Theron, he's the king's military advisor, thinks Vire will attack from the east. But Lady Ascara says the real threat is internal, that Vire still has sympathizers in the court who'll strike when we're weakest. Mira twisted the sheet in her hands nervously. They're all scared, not just of Vire, but of what bringing you back means. Some think you're the key to winning. Others think you're the spark that'll set the whole kingdom burning. What do you think? The girl met her eyes directly. I think Lady Lysa trusted the king, and the king trusts you. That's enough for me. It was such simple faith, so different from the calculated politics Rhea expected from the palace. She wanted to warn Mira that trust got people killed, that faith was a luxury no one could afford in this place. But looking at the girl's earnest face, she couldn't bring herself to crush that fragile hope. Be careful who you say that to, Rhea said instead. Loyalty can be dangerous here. I know. Mira finished with the bed and moved toward the door. But some things are worth the danger. After she left, Rhea bathed for the first time in months, scrubbing away 3 years of dirt and desperation until her skin was raw. The water turned gray, then black. She watched it swirl down the drain and felt like she was washing away more than just grime. She was shedding the forest survivor, the ghost, the girl who'd hidden from her own shadow. What emerged from that bath was someone harder, someone who'd survived winter wolves and starvation and the constant terror of being hunted. Someone who'd learned that the only person you could rely on was yourself. She dressed in one of Lysa's gowns, a simple gray dress that fit well enough despite being slightly loose in the shoulders. The mirror showed a stranger, gaunt, scarred, with eyes that had seen too much. But underneath the damage, Rhea recognized something of her sister in her own reflection, the same stubborn set to the jaw, the same refusal to break. Sunset came too quickly. The council chamber was deep in the palace's heart, a circular room with a domed ceiling painted with constellations that hadn't been visible from the northern sky in centuries. A round table dominated the space, carved from a single massive oak and polished to a mirror shine. Around it sat the kingdom's most powerful nobles, advisors, and military commanders. They all stopped talking when Rhea entered. King Arik stood at the head of the table, still in his formal parade armor, though he'd removed the heavy outer plate. He gestured to an empty chair at his right hand. "Rhea Calder, please, join us." She moved to the chair, acutely aware of every eye tracking her progress. The nobles didn't bother hiding their reactions, some curious, some hostile, some calculating in a way that made her skin crawl. "This is highly irregular," a woman in crimson velvet said. She was perhaps 40, beautiful in a sharp-edged way, with dark hair coiled in an elaborate style. Bringing a fugitive to a closed council session, "Lady Iskara," Arik cut her off smoothly, "Rhea is here under my protection and at my invitation. She has as much right to hear this as anyone. She has no title, no lands, no formal standing in court." This from an older man with a gray beard and military decorations covering his chest. "With respect, Your Majesty, discussing state security with a civilian, Lord Theron." The king's voice dropped to a temperature that could freeze blood. "Rhea is the target of the conspiracy we're trying to stop. I'd say that gives her rather significant standing, wouldn't you?" Theron's jaw clenched, but he fell silent. Arik turned to address the full table. "As you all know by now, Cassian Vyre has been building strength in the eastern provinces. My spies report he's gathered approximately 3,000 soldiers, a mixture of mercenaries and disenfranchised nobles who still believe his lies about my supposed tyranny." 3,000. A younger man with scholarly robes shook his head. "Against the full might of the kingdom's armies, that's suicide." "Unless he has something that evens the odds," Lady Iskara said, her gaze sliding to Rhea. "Something like the old magic that hasn't been seen in 500 years. The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. Rhea felt the weight of their attention like a physical pressure, crushing and invasive. "The old magic is a myth," Lord Theron said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Stories to frighten children." "Is it?" Iskara leaned forward. "Because I've read the histories. The Rain bloodline once commanded forces that could tear down castle walls, summon storms, remake the very earth. If even a fraction of that power still exists, then Vyre wants to control it." Arik's words fell like stones into water. "Which is why he's been hunting Rhea for 3 years. Her mother's line traces back to House Rain. If the magic survived in any form, it would be in her blood." All eyes turned to Rhea. She forced herself to meet their stares without flinching. "Can you do it?" Theron asked bluntly. "Can you summon this power they speak of?" "I don't know." The admission felt like swallowing glass. "I've never tried. I didn't even know it was supposed to exist until today." "Convenient," Iskara murmured. Rhea's temper, frayed by years of survival and the stress of returning to this place, finally snapped. "You think this is convenient? You think I wanted any of this? My sister died trying to stop Vyre. I spent 3 years hiding in the forest, eating roots and fighting wolves, because coming back here meant becoming a target for every power-hungry noble who wants to use me as a weapon." She stood, chairs scraping. "So forgive me if I can't perform magic tricks on command for your amusement, Lady Iskara." Silence crashed across the chamber. Then, unexpectedly, Arik laughed. A short, sharp sound devoid of humor. "She has a point. We've spent this entire meeting discussing Rhea as if she's a strategic asset instead of a person." He turned to her, his expression gentling. "Sit, please. I apologize for their rudeness." Rhea remained standing. "I want to know what you expect from me, all of you, because if you think I'm going to be your magical solution to Vyre's army, you're going to be disappointed." "What we expect," Arik said carefully, "is that you'll let us protect you while we deal with Vyre. Nothing more." "You're lying." The words came out flat, certain. No one goes through this much trouble just to protect someone. You want something from me. What is it? The king's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. We want you to be bait. The honesty of it was like a slap. At least two of the council members gasped. Your Majesty, Theron started. She deserves the truth. Arik kept his eyes on Rhea. Vyre won't strike while you're missing. He'll keep searching, keep building his forces, waiting for the perfect moment. But if we make it known you're here, under my protection, he'll move. He'll have to. And when he does, we'll be ready. You want to use me as bait to draw out a traitor with an army of 3,000 soldiers? Rhea's laugh was brittle. And you think I'll just agree to this? I think, Arik said quietly, that you're smart enough to know it's the only way to end this. As long as Vyre believes you have power he can claim, he'll never stop hunting you. The only way to survive is to face him directly. Or I could run, disappear again. I'm very good at it. For how long? Lady Iskara's voice was surprisingly gentle. Another 3 years? 5? 10? How long before his hunters finally track you down in whatever wilderness you've hidden yourself in, and there's no king's protection to save you? Rhea wanted to argue, but the logic was sound. She'd known it the moment she took Arik's hand in that courtyard. Running was temporary. This, dangerous as it was, might actually end the threat. She sat down slowly. What exactly does being bait involve? Public appearances, Theron said, all business now. We'll make sure every spy in the capital knows you're here. Vyre will receive the news within days. He'll mobilize, and our scouts will track his movements. When he commits to an attack, we'll be prepared. And what happens to me during this attack? You'll be in the most secure part of the palace, Arik said, surrounded by my personal guard. Vyre will have to go through 3 layers of elite soldiers to reach you. Unless he has magic of his own, Rhea met the king's gaze. Unless whatever power you think I have, he's already found a way to counter it. Then we adapt. Arik's voice carried absolute certainty. I didn't survive 7 assassination attempts by being inflexible. Whatever Vyre brings, we'll match it. The meeting continued for another hour, devolving into arguments about troop placement and supply lines that Rhea only half followed. Her mind was caught on the impossibility of her situation. A girl who'd spent 3 years as a ghost, now expected to stand in the spotlight and wait for a killer to strike. When the council finally dismissed, Rhea escaped to the corridor outside, needing air and space away from the crushing weight of their expectations. She'd made it halfway to the tower stairs when footsteps echoed behind her. That was brave. Lady Iskara appeared at her shoulder, moving with surprising silence for someone in such elaborate dress. Or foolish. I haven't decided which. Rhea kept walking. I'm not interested in court games, my lady. Good. Because I'm not playing one. Iskara matched her pace. I knew your sister. Not well, but enough to respect her. Lisa was one of the few honest people in this nest of vipers, and yet she still died here. Yes, Iskara's voice softened. She did, which is why I'm going to give you advice you won't like. Don't trust the king. Rhea stopped, turning to face the noblewoman. He's kept his promise so far. Has he? Or has he simply maneuvered you exactly where he needs you, visible, vulnerable, perfectly positioned as bait for his enemy? Iskara's eyes glittered in the torchlight. Arik Thornvale is a good king, but he's still a king. He'll sacrifice anyone, including you, if it means protecting the kingdom. Why tell me this? Because Lysa deserved better than to die alone in the dark, and I won't let her sister suffer the same fate out of ignorance. Iskara stepped closer, lowering her voice. Watch yourself, Rhea Calder. There are forces moving in this palace that even the king doesn't fully control. Vyre's sympathizers are still here, still working, still waiting for the right moment to strike. And when they do, they won't come for you openly. Before Rhea could respond, Iskara swept away down the corridor, leaving her alone with the warning echoing in her mind. She climbed the tower stairs slowly, exhaustion finally catching up. The chambers felt less oppressive now, more like a refuge than a prison. Mira had left a dinner tray, roasted chicken, fresh bread, wine that tasted like summer. Rhea ate mechanically, tasting none of it. Later, as she lay in her sister's bed staring at the ceiling, sleep refused to come. Every creak of the tower made her tense. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. 3 years of survival instincts couldn't be turned off, simply because she had walls and guards around her. Around midnight, a soft scratching at the door brought her bolt upright, hand reaching instinctively for a knife that wasn't there. The scratching came again, deliberate. A code, maybe, or... She opened the door a crack and found Mira standing there, pale and shaking. "Miss, you need to come quickly." The girl's voice trembled. "There's been an incident in the archives. They're saying..." She swallowed hard. "They're saying someone was murdered, just like Lady Lysa." The blood drained from Rhea's face. "Who?" "Lord Harlan, one of the council members. They found him an hour ago." Mira's eyes were wide with fear. "Miss, they found him in the same room where your sister died, and there was a message carved into the floor." "What message?" Mira's whisper was barely audible. "The Calder line ends tonight." Rhea's heart hammered against her ribs as she followed Mira through corridors that twisted like serpents through the palace's heart. The servant girl moved with practiced efficiency, navigating passages Rhea had forgotten existed, taking routes that avoided the main halls where guards would stop them with questions neither could answer. "How do you know about the message?" Rhea whispered as they descended a narrow servant's staircase. "If they only found him an hour ago." "My brother works in the guard." Mira's voice was tight with fear. "He came to warn me, said I should get you somewhere safe before..." She stopped abruptly at a landing, pressing herself against the wall. Footsteps echoed from below, heavy boots on stone, guards rushing toward the archives. They waited in tense silence until the sound faded, then continued downward. The air grew colder, mustier. They were entering the older parts of the palace, sections built centuries ago when the northern kings ruled from stone fortresses instead of elegant halls. The archives occupied the entire western basement, a labyrinth of shelves and reading rooms where the kingdom's history slept in leather and parchment. Rhea had spent countless childhood hours here, reading while Lysa worked. She knew these rooms the way wolves knew their hunting grounds, by instinct, by scent, by the particular quality of silence that lived between the books. That silence was shattered now. Voices drifted through the heavy oak door that marked the archive entrance. Angry voices, accusing, defensive. Rhea pressed her ear to the wood and caught fragments of argument. "Can't be coincidence. Calder girl returns and suddenly should arrest her immediately before..." "Enough!" King Aric's voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. "I want this room sealed. No one enters without my direct order, and someone find me Captain Voss. Now." Rhea pulled back from the door, mind racing. They thought she was responsible. Of course they did. The girl connected to the old magic, the one Vyre wanted, returning just before another council member died in the exact same spot as her sister. The logic was damning even if it was wrong. "Miss, we should go." Mira tugged at her sleeve. "If they find you here, I need to see." Rhea reached for the door handle. "Are you mad? They'll think you came back to..." "To what? Admire my handiwork?" Rhea's laugh was bitter. "They already think I'm guilty, Mira. Running now just confirms it." Before the girl could protest further, Rhea pushed open the door and stepped into chaos. The archive's main reading room was a circular space ringed by shelves that rose 3 stories high, accessible by spiral staircases and narrow catwalks. In the center stood a massive table carved with maps of the Old Kingdom, borders that no longer existed, territories long since absorbed or abandoned. That table was where Lysa had worked, where she'd spent her last hours cataloging the evidence that would expose Vyre's conspiracy. And now, at the base of the northern shelving unit, Lord Harlan's body lay in a spreading pool of blood. The room fell silent as Rhea entered. 20 pairs of eyes turned to her. Guards, nobles, scholars who'd been working late when the murder was discovered. King Aric stood near the body, his face carved from granite, but something flickered in his gold eyes when he saw her. Surprise, maybe. Or resignation. "Rhea." His voice carried no inflection. "I specifically told you to remain in your chambers. You told me I was under your protection, not under house arrest." She moved closer, forcing herself to look at the corpse, even though every instinct screamed to turn away. Harlan had been in his 60s, gray-bearded and soft around the middle. He'd sat 3 seats down from her at the council meeting, saying little, watching everything. Now his throat was cut ear to ear, the wound so deep it had nearly severed his head. and carved into the floor beside him, letters scored deep into ancient wood. The Calder line ends tonight. I didn't do this, Rhea said quietly. Of course you didn't. Lady Ascara emerged from behind a shelf, her crimson dress darkened to black in the dim light. You've been in the tower all evening. Half a dozen servants can confirm it. Then who? Rhea started, but Ascara's sharp gesture cut her off. The question isn't who killed Harlan. It's who wants us to think you did. The noblewoman's eyes glittered with dangerous intelligence. This is too obvious, too theatrical. Someone's trying to turn the court against you. Vyer's agents. Lord Theron stood on the room's far side, his military decorations catching torchlight. It has to be. He can't attack openly yet, so he's sowing chaos, making us turn on each other, or making us waste time with paranoia while he moves his army into position. Arik knelt beside the body, examining the wound with clinical precision. This cut was made by someone trained, clean, efficient, not the work of an amateur or someone in a rage. He looked up at his guards. Check Harlan's chambers. Find out who had access to him tonight, who he met with, what he was working on. Your Majesty. One of the guards stepped forward, young and nervous. There's something else. We found this in his hand. He held out a scrap of parchment, crumpled and stained with blood. Arik took it carefully, smoothing the page. His expression darkened as he read. What is it? Rhea moved closer, close enough to see over his shoulder. The parchment held a single sentence in handwriting she didn't recognize. The girl's power awakens at the blood moon. 3 days. 3 days until what? Ascara demanded. Arik stood slowly, and for the first time since Rhea had met him, she saw something like uncertainty cross his face. 3 days until the blood moon eclipse. It happens once every 7 years. The old texts say it's when the barrier between worlds grows thin, when magic that sleeps in bloodlines can be activated. Activated how? Rhea's voice came out steadier than she felt. I don't know. The texts are fragmentary, most lost during the Purge 4 centuries ago. He met her gaze directly. But if Vyer believes your power manifests during the eclipse, he'll move heaven and earth to either claim you or kill you before it happens. The room erupted in argument, lords and scholars shouting over each other, debating magical theory and military strategy in equal measure. Rhea barely heard them. Her mind was stuck on a memory from 2 years ago, a night in the frontier when the moon had turned red as blood, when she'd felt something stirring in her chest like a second heartbeat, wild and ancient and terrifying. She'd buried that memory, convinced herself it was fever or fear or imagination. But what if it hadn't been? Evacuate her, Theron's voice cut through the noise. Get her out of the city, hide her somewhere Vyer's spies can't track. If we remove the prize from the board, he has no reason to attack. He'll attack anyway. Ascara shook her head. He's committed too many resources, taken too many risks. Retreating now would be seen as weakness. His own followers would turn on him. Then we fortify. Another noble Rhea didn't recognize spoke up. Triple the palace guard. Seal the gates. Make this place an unbreakable fortress until the eclipse passes. And trap ourselves inside. Arik's tone was sharp. Vyer would love nothing more than to have us cowering behind walls while his army surrounds us. A siege that lasts long enough would starve the entire city. So what do you suggest? Theron challenged. We can't hide her, can't fortify, can't evacuate. What's left? The king's jaw tightened. We do exactly what we planned. We make Rhea visible, let Vyer come for her, and crush him when he commits his forces. You're talking about using her as bait during a blood moon eclipse when her supposed power is at its peak. Ascara's voice dripped with incredulity. That's not strategy. That's suicide. It's the only option that doesn't leave us vulnerable to Vyer's next move. Arik turned to Rhea. But it's your choice. I won't force you to I'll do it. The words came out before she could second-guess them. If there's even a chance this ends the threat, I'll take it. Silence fell across the archive. Even the nobles who'd been arguing stopped to stare at her. You understand what you're agreeing to, Arik said quietly. If the texts are right, if your power does manifest during the eclipse, there's no telling what will happen. You could lose control, hurt people, destroy half the palace. Or I could finally have a weapon to fight back with. Rhea's hands curled into fists. I'm tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of being hunted like an animal while powerful men decide my fate. If I have power, I want to use it, and if I don't—" She met his gaze steadily. "Then at least I'll die making Vyre work for it." Something that might have been respect flickered across the king's face. "Then we have 3 days to prepare. Theron, I want the palace guard doubled. Iskara, work with the scholars to find everything we can about the Rain bloodline and Blood Moon rituals. Everyone else, absolute secrecy. If word of this reaches Vyre before we're ready—" "Your Majesty!" A guard burst through the archive door, armor clattering, face white with panic. "The Eastern Wall! We're under attack!" The world seemed to stop. "That's impossible." Theron's voice was flat with shock. "Our scouts would have reported troop movements. Vyre's army is still 3 days' march from—" "It's not Vyre's army." The guard struggled for breath. "It's something else, something— Please, you have to see for yourself." They ran. Rhea found herself swept along in the king's wake as they raced through corridors and up staircases, nobles and guards falling in behind like a ragged tide. The Eastern Wall was the oldest part of the palace fortifications, built when the northern kings faced invasion from sea raiders and rival kingdoms. Now it served mostly as a boundary marker, separating the palace grounds from the city proper. They emerged onto the ramparts, and Rhea's breath stopped in her throat. The eastern courtyard was on fire. Not normal fire. This burned wrong, the flames too bright, too cold, crackling with energy that made the air itself shimmer. And in the center of that impossible inferno stood a figure cloaked in shadows that seemed to drink the light. Cassian Vyre. Aric's voice was barely a whisper. The traitor had come himself. Vyre stood motionless amid the flames, his face hidden by a hood, but power radiated from him in waves that made Rhea's teeth ache. He raised one hand and the fire responded, twisting into shapes. Serpents, wolves, creatures that had never walked the natural world. They prowled the courtyard's edges, keeping the guards at bay, while Vyre himself remained untouched. "Aric Thornvale!" His voice boomed across the courtyard, magically amplified. "You've taken something that belongs to me. Return the Calder girl, and I'll withdraw peacefully. Refuse, and I'll burn this palace to ash and take her from the ruins." He's bluffing. Theron had appeared at Aric's shoulder, sword drawn. One man, even with magic, can't breach the full palace guard. Can't he? Iskara pointed to the courtyard gates. They were melting, the iron running like water, the stone cracking from supernatural heat. That's not normal magic. That's something old, something forbidden. Rhea felt it then. A pull, like invisible threads connecting her chest to the fire below. The flames called to something inside her, something that had been sleeping for years but was starting to wake. Her hands began to shake. "Rhea?" Aric noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" "I can feel it." Her voice sounded distant even to her own ears. "The magic, it's responding to him." "Fight it." The king gripped her shoulder, hard enough to bruise. "Don't let him pull you in. That's what he wants, to trigger your power before you're ready, before you can control it." But fighting it was like trying to hold back a flood with bare hands. The power inside her surged, wild and eager, straining against the fragile control she'd maintained for years without even knowing it. Her vision started to blur, reality fracturing at the edges. In the courtyard, Vyre laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "I can taste it from here. The old magic finally waking. Come down, little Calder. Come meet your destiny." "Archers!" Theron roared. "Target the cloaked figure. Fire at will!" A volley of arrows darkened the sky, whistling down toward Vyre. They never reached him. The flames rose like a living wall, incinerating the shafts mid-flight, turning them to ash that drifted down like black snow. "Your weapons are useless against me, old man." Vyre's attention shifted to Theron. "I've bathed in the blood of the Ancient Ones. I've consumed power that would shatter your small mind. I am become something beyond your mortal kings and their mortal armies. You're a traitor and a murderer." Aric's voice carried absolute authority. "And you'll die like one, screaming for mercy that won't come." "Will I?" Vyre gestured, and the fire serpent surged forward, crashing against the palace walls. Stone cracked. Guards screamed, falling back from the supernatural heat. "I think not. I think tonight, This kingdom learns what real power looks like. The pull on Rhea's chest intensified, becoming painful. She gasped, doubling over, distantly aware of Arik shouting for healers, of Iskara cursing, of chaos erupting around her. But all she could focus on was the pressure building inside her, the power that wanted to break free, to answer Vyre's call, to... No. She bit the word out through clenched teeth. No, I won't. I won't let you. You don't have a choice, Vyre's voice thundered. The blood calls to blood. The magic recognizes its master. Come to me, Rhea Calder, or watch everyone you've ever cared about burn. The fire exploded outward, a nova of impossible heat that sent guards stumbling back, their armor too hot to touch. The eastern wing of the palace began to smoke. Somewhere below, servants were screaming, trying to evacuate through exits that were rapidly becoming sealed by flame. And still the power inside Rhea built, pressure increasing until she thought her ribs would crack, her heart would burst, her very bones would shatter from the force of it. Let it out! Arik's voice was suddenly close to her ear, steady and calm despite the chaos. Stop fighting it. Let the power flow, but on your terms, not his. I don't know how. Yes, you do. His hand steadied her shoulders, keeping her upright. You've been controlling it for years without realizing it. Every time you felt it rising and pushed it down. Every time fear or anger made it stir and you forced yourself calm. You already know how to direct it. You just have to choose where it goes. Rhea looked down at the courtyard, at Vyre standing amid his conjured flames, at the destruction he was causing, at the innocent people dying because of his hunger for power. And she made a choice. She stopped fighting. The power erupted from her like a dam breaking, a surge of energy so vast and ancient it made Vyre's flames look like candle flickers. Light, pure, blinding, silver white, exploded outward from her body, washing across the ramparts, down into the courtyard, spreading through the palace like a tidal wave. Where it touched Vyre's fire, the flames simply ceased to exist, not extinguished, not fought. They just stopped being, as if reality itself had decided they didn't belong. The fire serpents dissolved. The burning gates cooled. The smoke cleared, leaving only clean air and stunned silence. Rhea stood at the center of the light, hair whipping in a wind that came from nowhere, eyes blazing with power that had slept in her bloodline for 500 years. She felt invincible, terrifying, like she could reshape the world with a thought. And in the courtyard below, Cassian Vyre staggered backward, his shadow cloak torn away to reveal a man in his 40s, with burn scars covering half his face and eyes wide with something between awe and terror. Impossible, he whispered. The ritual, it's not complete. The blood moon hasn't... You shouldn't be able to... Rhea descended from the ramparts without consciously deciding to move. The power simply carried her, lifting her over the wall and setting her down in the courtyard with the gentleness of a falling leaf. Guards scrambled out of her path. Even Vyre retreated a step. You wanted my power. Her voice echoed strangely, harmonizing with itself. Here it is. She raised one hand and the air around Vyre began to crack. Actual rifts opening in reality, showing glimpses of somewhere else. Somewhere dark and cold and infinite, a void between worlds where things that shouldn't exist waited in eternal hunger. Vyre's composure shattered. Wait! You don't understand what you're doing. If you open those rifts fully, you'll... I'll what? Rhea took a step forward, and another rift tore open, this one larger, more stable. Through it, she could see shapes moving. Ancient things, hungry things. I'll banish you to the same void you've been drawing power from? Seems fitting. The void will consume you too. Vyre's desperation was palpable now. That magic you're using, it feeds on life force. It's burning through your soul with every second. Stop before there's nothing left of you. She's not alone. King Arik appeared at Rhea's side, sword drawn, his presence somehow anchoring her to reality. And you're a liar. You've been lying since the day you plotted your coup, since you murdered Rhea Calder, since you spent 3 years hunting an innocent girl for power you could never control. Innocent? Vyre laughed wildly. Look at her. She's tearing holes in reality. She's more dangerous than I ever was. The difference, Arik said coldly, is that she's using that danger to protect people. You use it to enslave them. Rhea felt the king's presence like a lifeline. pulling her back from the edge of losing herself entirely to the power. She could feel it now, what Vire had warned about, the magic draining her, burning through her life force to fuel its impossible effects. She had minutes, maybe less, before it consumed her completely. But minutes were enough. She focused on the largest rift, widening it, stabilizing it, making it large enough to engulf a man. The void beyond howled with winds that had never touched mortal air. "No!" Vire threw up his hands, conjuring defensive shields of shadow and flame. "I won't go back. I won't return to that darkness. You won't have a choice." Rhea's vision was starting to blur, exhaustion crushing down on her, but she pushed harder, drawing on reserves she didn't know she had. The rift expanded, its pull becoming irresistible, dragging at Vire's shields, tearing them apart like paper. The traitor screamed, a sound of pure animal terror, as the void's gravity seized him. His feet left the ground. His shadow magic unraveled. For a moment he hung suspended between worlds, and Rhea saw his face clearly. Not a monster, not a demon, just a man who'd reached too far and grabbed something that was eating him from the inside out. Almost, she pitied him. Then she remembered Lysa bleeding out on cold stone. Remembered 3 years of running, of starving, of sleeping in the rain because returning to civilization meant death. Remembered Lord Harlan's corpse and the message carved into the floor, the implicit threat against anyone who bore the Calder name. She stopped pitying him. With a final surge of power that left her gasping, Rhea shoved Vire through the rift. He didn't even have time to scream. The void swallowed him whole, and she slammed the tear shut behind him, sealing it with magic that would hold until the stars burned cold. Silence crashed across the courtyard. Then her legs gave out. Auric caught her before she hit the ground, lowering her carefully. Rhea, stay with me." She tried to answer, but her voice wouldn't work. The power was draining away, leaving her hollow and cold, every nerve screaming with exhaustion. Distantly, she was aware of people gathering around, guards, nobles, scholars, who'd watched the impossible happen and couldn't quite believe their eyes. "Is she—" Someone's voice, shocked. "Is she dying? Get the healers!" Auric's command cracked like a whip. "Now!" Rhea wanted to tell him she was fine, that she just needed rest, that the burning sensation in her chest was probably normal after channeling enough power to rip reality apart. But darkness was closing in at the edges of her vision, and speaking seemed like too much effort. The last thing she saw before consciousness fled was the king's face above her, his gold eyes filled with something that looked almost like fear. Then the world went black, and Rhea fell into a darkness deeper than any void she'd conjured. Pain woke her. Not the sharp, immediate kind that came from wounds or broken bones, but a deep, bone-level ache that felt like her entire body had been wrung out and left to dry. Rhea's eyes fluttered open to unfamiliar ceiling, carved wood beams painted with constellations she didn't recognize, lit by the soft glow of dozens of candles. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Every muscle screamed protest, her vision swimming with dark spots. Easy. A hand pressed gently against her shoulder, easing her back down. "You've been unconscious for 2 days. Your body needs time to recover." Rhea turned her head. Even that small movement cost her, and found King Auric sitting beside her bed. He looked terrible. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, stubble covered his jaw, and his formal armor had been replaced by a simple tunic that bore wrinkles, suggesting he'd slept in it. If he'd slept at all. 2 days? Her voice came out as a rasp, throat dry as sand. He reached for a cup on the bedside table, helping her drink. The water tasted like heaven. "The healers said it was a miracle you survived at all. The amount of power you channeled." He shook his head. "It should have killed you instantly." Memory flooded back, the courtyard, the fire. Vire's face as the void swallowed him whole. She'd torn open reality itself and somehow lived to regret it. "Did it work?" she asked. "Is he really gone?" The scholars examined the courtyard. They found traces of void magic, but no sign of Vire himself. No body, no remains, nothing. Auric's expression was grim. "If the old texts are accurate, whatever you sent him into doesn't give up its prey easily. He's either dead or wishing he was." "Good," Rhea thought with savage satisfaction. Then, immediately after, "What kind of person does that make me?" His army scattered the moment news spread of what happened. Arik continued, oblivious to her internal conflict. 3,000 soldiers, and they dissolved overnight. Some surrendered. Most just ran. Without Vyre to hold them together, they had no cause, no leadership, no reason to die for a failed coup. So it's over. The words felt strange in her mouth. 3 years of running, and it's just over. The immediate threat is gone, yes. The king's tone carried a weight that suggested complications remained. But the aftermath, that's going to take time to resolve. He stood, moving to the window. Dawn light filtered through, painting him in shades of gold and shadow. The court is in chaos. Half the nobles are terrified of you. The other half want to use you as a weapon against their enemies. There are already 3 different factions arguing about what your display of power means for the kingdom's future. Rhea closed her eyes. Of course there were. She'd gone from hunted fugitive to political lightning rod in the span of a single night. What do you want from me? Honestly? He turned back to face her. I want you to rest, recover, and then make your own choice about what comes next. You've earned that much. That's not an answer. No, he admitted. It's not. But it's the truth regardless. He moved back to the chair, settling into it with the weariness of a man who'd been standing guard for days. The truth is, Rhea, I don't know what happens next. The kingdom has never had someone with your power. The old bloodlines died out centuries ago, or so we thought. You're an unknown variable in an already unstable equation. So I'm a problem. You're a person who deserves to be treated as such, not as a weapon or a threat. His gold eyes met hers directly. And yes, that makes you a problem for people who prefer their world simple and controllable. Before Rhea could respond, the door opened, and Mira entered carrying a breakfast tray. The servant girl's face lit up when she saw Rhea awake. Miss, oh, thank the stars, we were so worried. She set the tray down with shaking hands. The whole palace has been talking about nothing else. They're saying you saved the kingdom. They're saying you're the most powerful mage in 500 years. They're saying, Mira. Arik's tone was gentle but firm. Perhaps let her eat before overwhelming her with gossip. The girl flushed. Of course, Your Majesty. Sorry, She looked at Rhea with something between awe and affection. I'm glad you're alive, miss. That's all. After she left, Rhea picked at the food without much appetite. Her mind was too full of questions, of possibilities, of the weight of what she'd done and what it meant. The healers want to examine you, Arik said after a while. Make sure the magic didn't cause any lasting damage, and the scholars are desperate to speak with you about what you felt, what you saw when you opened those rifts. And if I refuse? Then they'll be disappointed, but they'll survive it. He stood, preparing to leave. You're not a prisoner here, Rhea. You never were. Once you're strong enough to walk, you're free to go wherever you choose. Even back to the forest? He paused at the door. Even there, though I hope you won't. Why? Because the kingdom needs people who understand that power isn't the same as strength, that protecting others matters more than protecting yourself. His hand rested on the door handle. And because Lysa asked me to keep you safe, I'd like to honor that promise completely, not just halfway. He left before she could formulate a response. Over the next 3 days, Rhea's strength returned slowly. The healers examined her with a mixture of professional detachment and poorly concealed fascination, declaring her recovery miraculous but incomplete. The magic had burned through her reserves, leaving her weak in ways that normal rest couldn't fully address. They recommended meditation, controlled breathing exercises, and absolutely no magical exertion for at least a month. Rhea agreed to everything and promptly ignored most of it. She spent her waking hours exploring the palace, relearning its rhythms, watching how people reacted to her presence. The servants treated her with careful respect, keeping their distance but offering small kindnesses, extra blankets, favorite foods they somehow knew she preferred, fresh flowers in her chambers. The guards nodded acknowledgement when she passed, hands resting on sword hilts not in threat but in salute. The nobles were a different matter entirely. She encountered Lord Theron in the training yard on her 4th day of consciousness. The old military commander was drilling soldiers, his voice carrying across the courtyard as he corrected stances and criticized techniques. He saw her approaching and called a break, wiping sweat from his brow. "Lady Calder." His tone was formal, guarded. "You're looking better." "I'm not a lady." "You saved the king's life and banished the kingdom's greatest threat. That makes you nobility whether you have a title or not." He gestured to a bench in the shade. "Walk with me." They sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment. Around them, soldiers resumed training, the clash of practice swords providing a rhythmic backdrop. "I owe you an apology," Theron said finally. "When you first returned, I saw you as a liability, a complication we didn't need. I was wrong." Rhea studied his weathered face, looking for deception and finding only honest regret. "You were protecting the kingdom. I understand that. Understanding doesn't erase the disrespect." He met her gaze squarely. "You demonstrated more courage in one night than most soldiers show in a lifetime. Whatever happens next, you've earned the realm's gratitude, mine included." It was a small thing, this acknowledgement from a gruff military man, but it loosened something tight in Rhea's chest, a knot of tension she hadn't realized she was carrying. "Thank you," she said quietly. They sat together for a while longer, watching the soldiers train, before Theron excused himself to return to duty. As Rhea walked back toward the palace, she found Lady Iscara waiting near the gardens, dressed in her usual crimson. "So?" The noblewoman fell into step beside her. "You've gone from hunted fugitive to kingdom savior in less than a week. How does it feel?" "Surreal," Rhea admitted, "like I'm waiting for someone to realize it was all a mistake." "Not a mistake, a revelation." Iscara's tone was thoughtful. "The court is realizing that the old stories weren't just stories, that the magic they thought was safely buried in history is very much alive, and they're terrified." "Of me?" "Of what you represent. Change. Power they can't control or predict." Iscara paused beside a fountain, trailing her fingers through the water. "There's a faction forming, nobles who want to exile you, claiming you're too dangerous to remain in the capital. They're using Lord Harlan's death as evidence that your presence brings violence." Rhea's hands clenched into fists. "I didn't kill Harlan. I know. So does anyone with half a brain. But fear makes people stupid, and stupid people are dangerous in groups." Iscara turned to face her directly. "The king is holding them off for now, but he can't do it forever. You need allies, Rhea, people who see you as more than just a threat or a weapon." "Are you offering?" "I'm stating a fact." But Iscara's slight smile suggested the answer was yes regardless. "Come to the council session tonight. Let them see you're not some uncontrollable force of nature. Show them the person behind the power." The council chamber felt different this time. Less hostile, perhaps, but no less tense. The nobles watched Rhea enter with expressions ranging from respect to fear to calculating interest. Lord Theron nodded greeting. Lady Iscara smiled encouragement. And at the head of the table, King Auric gestured to the same seat she'd occupied during her first disastrous council meeting. "Thank you all for coming," Auric began without preamble. "We're here to discuss the kingdom's security in the aftermath of Vyre's attack. Lord Theron, your report." The military commander stood, unrolling a map across the table. "Vyre's remaining forces have scattered across the eastern provinces. Most surrendered to local authorities, but approximately 500 remain unaccounted for. I recommend sending detachments to secure the major roads, and before we discuss military matters," a noble Rhea didn't recognize interrupted, "shouldn't we address the greater concern? The magical weapon currently residing in our palace?" Silence fell across the chamber. Rhea felt every eye turn toward her. "Lord Canis," Auric's voice could have frozen steel. "Choose your next words very carefully." "I speak only truth, Your Majesty." Canis was perhaps 50, soft-featured and dressed in expensive silks. "Lady Calder demonstrated power that destroyed half our eastern courtyard, power that, by her own admission, she cannot fully control. How long before another outburst causes more damage? How long before she decides the throne would look better occupied by someone of her bloodline?" "That's absurd," Iscara started, but Rhea raised a hand, silencing her. "Lord Canis is right." The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. Even Auric looked surprised. Rhea stood, forcing her voice to remain calm despite the anger burning in her chest. "Not about the throne. I have no interest in ruling anything, but about the danger." She met Canis's gaze directly. "What I did 3 nights ago terrified me. The power was vast, ancient, and I had maybe 5 minutes of experience controlling it before I had to use it to save lives. I could have killed everyone in that courtyard. I could have torn rifts that never closed, letting void creatures into our world. The fact that I didn't was more luck than skill. You see? Canis gestured triumphantly. She admits, I'm not finished. Rhea's tone cut through his celebration. Yes, I'm dangerous. So is every soldier with a sword. So is every mage who studies the old arts. So is every noble with enough gold to hire assassins. She looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. The question isn't whether I'm dangerous. It's whether I'm a threat. And the answer to that depends entirely on how you treat me. Is that a warning? Another noble asked nervously. It's a statement of fact. Rhea sat back down, suddenly exhausted. I didn't ask for this power. I didn't want any of this. But I have it now, and running away won't change that. So we have two choices. Either we figure out how to live with it, how to help me learn control, how to use this power to protect the kingdom instead of threatening it, or you can exile me and hope Vyre was the last person who wanted to claim what I carry in my blood. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, unexpectedly, Lord Theron laughed, a short, sharp bark of sound. The girl has steel, I'll give her that. He looked at Canis. You want her gone because she's dangerous. I say she's exactly the kind of dangerous we need, the kind that faces threats instead of running from them. Here, here, another noble added, an elderly woman Rhea recognized as Lady Margrave. My granddaughter was in the Eastern Wing during the attack. She'd be dead if not for Lady Calder's intervention. I won't forget that. Support trickled in from around the table, not universal, but enough to shift the atmosphere. Even Canis seemed to deflate slightly, realizing he'd miscalculated the room. King Auric let the debate continue for a few more minutes before raising his hand for silence. We'll put it to a vote. All in favor of Lady Calder remaining in the capital under the protection and guidance of the crown? Hands rose. Rhea counted quickly. 12 in favor, including Auric's own vote. Opposed? 5 hands. Canis's among them. The matter is settled. Auric's tone left no room for argument. Rhea Calder is under royal protection. Anyone who moves against her answers to me personally. His gold eyes fixed on Canis. Are we clear? Crystal, Your Majesty. The meeting continued, discussion turning to troop deployments and supply lines, but Rhea barely heard it. She was too focused on the impossible reality. She'd won, not through violence or magic, but through honesty and the support of people she was only beginning to know. When the council finally dismissed, she found herself alone with Auric in the corridor outside. That was brave, he said, admitting your fear in front of people looking for any excuse to exile you. It was stupid, Rhea corrected, but I'm tired of lying, tired of pretending to be something I'm not. What are you then? She considered the question. A week ago she would have said survivor, fugitive, ghost. Now? I'm someone learning that strength isn't the same as power, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help. Auric smiled. A real smile this time, not the political mask he wore in court. The scholars want to begin your training tomorrow, learning to control the magic to channel it safely. It won't be easy. Nothing worth doing is. True enough. He started walking and she fell into step beside him. For what it's worth, Rhea, I'm glad you stayed. The kingdom needs people who understand what power should be used for. And what's that? Protecting those who can't protect themselves. Standing between the innocent and the ones who'd harm them. He glanced at her. Your sister understood that. She gave her life for it. I think you do too. They walked in comfortable silence through corridors slowly becoming familiar. Servants nodded greeting as they passed. Guards saluted. A few nobles even bowed, though whether from respect or fear, Rhea couldn't tell. But it didn't matter. She was here. She was alive. And for the first time in 3 years, she wasn't running. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity. The scholars proved relentless in their curiosity, subjecting Rhea to tests and exercises designed to measure and develop her magical capacity. She learned to summon small rifts without exhausting herself, to channel energy in controlled bursts instead of overwhelming surges. Progress was slow, frustrating, and occasionally painful. More than once she pushed too hard and ended up unconscious for hours. But she improved. Mira became a constant companion, bringing meals and gossip in equal measure, providing a connection to the palace's lower levels that Rhea found invaluable. Through the servant girl's eyes, she learned how the common folk viewed recent events, with a mixture of awe, gratitude, and the practical understanding that magical power was only as good as the person wielding it. "They're calling you the Silver Hand," Mira reported one evening, setting down a dinner tray. "Because of the light you summoned. Silver is moonlight, they say, and just as beautiful." "That's ridiculous." "Maybe, but it's better than some of the other names they considered." Mira grinned. "The Voidwalker was popular for a while, and the Rift Queen. Personally, I like the Silver Hand. It sounds hopeful." Hopeful. Rhea turned the word over in her mind like a foreign coin. When had she last felt genuine hope? Before Lysa's death, certainly. Before the years of running and hiding and sleeping with one eye open. "Maybe now," she thought. "Maybe I'm starting to feel it again." King Auric maintained a careful distance during her training, appearing occasionally to observe her progress but never interfering. Rhea appreciated the space. She needed to figure out who she was becoming without the pressure of royal expectation hanging over every decision. But one evening, a month after Vyre's banishment, Auric summoned her to the palace roof. She found him standing at the battlements, looking out over the city. Lights flickered in windows below, thousands of lives continuing in the aftermath of crisis. The blood moon eclipse had come and gone without incident, the power within Rhea stable enough that the celestial event triggered nothing more dramatic than a mild headache. "I wanted to show you something," Auric said as she approached. He gestured to the eastern district. "See those new buildings? The ones with fresh timber?" Rhea squinted. "What about them?" "Reconstruction. The fire from Vyre's attack destroyed 3 city blocks. We've been rebuilding, not just replacing what was lost, but improving it. Better materials, wider streets, proper drainage." He turned to face her. "The attack could have broken this city. Instead, it's given us a chance to build something stronger." "That's a very optimistic interpretation of people dying." "It's a realistic one." His expression was serious. "Tragedy happens, Rhea. Crisis comes whether we want it or not. What matters is what we do afterward, whether we let it destroy us or use it as foundation for something better." She understood what he was really saying. "You want me to help with the reconstruction. I want you to be part of the kingdom's future, whatever form that takes." He leaned against the battlements. "You could return to the archives if you wanted. Lisa's position remains unfilled. Or join the scholars in studying magical theory. Or train with the guard if martial pursuits interest you. Or," he hesitated, "or I could use someone with your perspective on the council. Someone who understands what it's like to be powerless and what power should truly be used for." "You're offering me a council seat." Rhea couldn't quite believe it. "I'm offering you a choice. The same thing I've been trying to give you since that first day in the courtyard." His gold eyes reflected starlight. "You've spent 3 years having your choices stolen. I won't do the same, even if my intentions are good." Rhea looked out over the city, at the lights and the life and the possibility spreading below. A month ago, she would have refused immediately, would have run back to the forest where the only person she had to worry about was herself. But she wasn't that person anymore. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "That's all I ask." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the city breathe. And for the first time since her sister's death, Rhea felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not quite peace, but maybe the beginning of it. A sense that the worst was behind her, that the future held possibilities beyond simple survival. Below, in the reconstructed Eastern District, someone was singing. The melody drifted up through the night air, a folk song about silver light and courage in darkness. Other voices joined in, building harmonies, turning individual notes into something beautiful and whole. Rhea closed her eyes and let the music wash over her, carrying away some of the weight she'd been carrying for so long. Tomorrow she would return to training. Tomorrow she would attend another council session. Tomorrow she would continue learning to be something more than a survivor, more than a weapon, more than a ghost haunted by her sister's memory. But tonight, standing on the palace roof with a king who'd kept his promise and a city that was learning not to fear her, Rhea Calder allowed herself to simply be. A girl who'd tried to disappear and ended up finding herself instead. The singing continued long into the night, and Rhea found herself reluctant to leave the rooftop. Up here, with the city spread below like a tapestry of light and shadow, the weight of the past month felt manageable, almost distant. But she knew the moment she descended those stairs, reality would reassert itself. The expectations, the fear, the constant scrutiny of people trying to decide if she was savior or threat. "You're thinking too loud," Arik said, breaking the comfortable silence. "I can practically hear the gears turning." "Just wondering when the other shoe will drop." Rhea kept her gaze on the horizon. "This feels too easy. A month ago I was sleeping in the forest eating half-rotten berries. Now I'm standing on a palace roof being offered a council seat. It doesn't feel real." "It's real, just fragile." The king moved to stand beside her. "Peace always is. We build it knowing it could shatter at any moment, and we build it anyway because the alternative is living in constant war." Before Rhea could respond, rapid footsteps echoed from the stairwell. A guard appeared, breathing hard, armor rattling. "Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion, but there's a situation in the Eastern Gate District. Captain Voss requests your immediate presence." Arik's expression hardened instantly. "What kind of situation?" "Refugees, sire. Hundreds of them, maybe more. They started arriving an hour ago, and they're not stopping." "Refugees from where?" The guard's face paled. "The eastern provinces, Your Majesty. They're saying Lord Vyer's remaining forces are burning villages, claiming territory in his name even though he's gone." The fragile peace Rhea had been contemplating shattered like glass. They descended through the palace at a near run, collecting Lord Theron and Lady Iskara along the way. By the time they reached the eastern gate, a crowd had gathered, not just refugees but city residents who'd come to gawk or help, or simply bear witness to the crisis unfolding at their doorstep. The scene was chaos. Families huddled together with whatever possessions they'd managed to carry. Bundles of clothing, cooking pots, children too young to understand why they'd been ripped from their homes in the middle of the night. An elderly woman sat on the cobblestones weeping while a young man, her son, perhaps, tried to comfort her. 3 children stood in shocked silence, their faces smudged with soot that suggested they'd fled a burning building. Captain Voss stood at the gate trying to maintain order, directing refugees toward temporary shelters in the market square while his guards checked for weapons or signs of infiltration. He looked exhausted and overwhelmed in equal measure. "How many?" Arik asked without preamble. 400 arrived so far, Your Majesty. The scouts report at least 200 more on the roads." Voss gestured helplessly at the crowd. "They're coming from 7 different villages, all telling the same story. Armed men wearing Vyer's colors attacking at night, burning crops, killing anyone who resists." "But Vyer is gone," Iskar said. "His army scattered. Where did these forces come from?" "The survivors say these aren't Vyer's original soldiers." Voss pulled out a crumpled report. "They're describing something else. Men with burn scars speaking in voices that sound wrong, moving with unnatural coordination, like puppets on strings." Ice flooded Rhea's veins. Void touched. Every eye turned to her. "When I banished Vyer, I sealed the rift. But he'd been drawing power from the void for months, maybe years. If some of his followers drank that same power, absorbed it." She struggled to articulate the horror forming in her mind. "The void doesn't give up what it claims. If Vyer's death severed their connection to him, but not to the source of his magic, they'd be puppets without a master," Arik finished grimly. "Operating on base instinct and residual commands. Destroy, conquer, kill." "Can they be stopped?" Theron demanded. Rhea thought of the void she'd glimpsed through those rifts, the hungry darkness that existed beyond reality's edge. "I don't know. Normal weapons might work, or they might not. It depends on how deeply the corruption runs." "Then we find out." Arik turned to Theron. "Mobilize 3 companies of cavalry. I want them on the road to the eastern provinces by dawn, with orders to engage and eliminate any void-touched forces they encounter." "Your Majesty, 3 companies against an unknown number of magically corrupted soldiers will have to be enough until we know what we're dealing with." The king's tone brooked no argument. "Iskara, work with the city council to house these refugees. Empty the old barracks if you have to. No one sleeps on the streets tonight." As his advisors scattered to execute orders, Arik pulled Rhea aside. "I need you to examine one of them, the refugees. Find out if any show signs of void corruption. If this spreads beyond Vire's followers, it won't. She spoke with more confidence than she felt. The void claims souls through willing contact. These people fled. They didn't embrace the darkness. You're certain? No, but I'll check anyway. She moved through the refugee crowd with Mira at her side, the servant girl having appeared from somewhere with blankets and waterskins. Rhea stopped beside a young mother clutching an infant, both of them shivering despite the mild night air. May I? Rhea gestured to the child. The mother's eyes widened with recognition. Apparently even refugees fleeing burning villages had heard about the silver hand. She nodded mutely, offering up her baby. Rhea held the infant carefully, closing her eyes and reaching for the magical sense she'd been developing over the past month. The scholars called it void sight, the ability to perceive corruption at a spiritual level. It felt like pressing against a bruise, uncomfortable but necessary. The baby's essence glowed clean and bright, untouched by darkness. Rhea released a breath she hadn't known she was holding and returned the child to his mother. He's safe, healthy. She repeated the process with dozens of refugees, finding the same result each time: fear, trauma, exhaustion, but no void corruption. Whatever Vire's remaining forces had become, they hadn't spread their infection to the innocent. It was small comfort given the larger crisis, but Rhea clung to it anyway. Dawn came too quickly, bringing with it the departure of Theron's cavalry and a palace thrown into emergency session. The council gathered not in the formal chamber but in the war room, a stark space dominated by maps and tactical displays. Latest reports put the void-touched force at approximately 200 soldiers, Theron announced, placing markers on the map. They're not organized like a traditional army. No supply lines, no camps, no apparent command structure. They just attack, burn, and move to the next target. Like a plague, Iskar observed darkly, spreading destruction without purpose or strategy. There has to be a pattern. Arik studied the map. 7 villages attacked, all within a 30-mile radius. What connects them? Rhea leaned forward, examining the markers. Something nagged at her, a half-formed connection her mind couldn't quite grasp. Then it clicked. They're all former Vire holdings, lands that belonged to his house before the coup attempt. Silence fell across the room. He's reclaiming his territory, Lord Canis said, his earlier hostility toward Rhea apparently forgotten in the face of greater crisis. Even dead, his will drives them. Not his will, his obsession. Rhea traced the pattern on the map. Vire wanted power above all else. The void feeds on desire, on hunger that can never be satisfied. His followers drank from that same source. Now they're acting out his final command: take back what was his. Burn anyone who stands in the way. Then we know where they'll strike next. Arik's finger landed on a location northeast of the current attacks. Vire's ancestral estate, the Thornhold Keep. If they're following his obsession, they'll try to claim it. The keep has been abandoned for 3 years, Theron objected. There's nothing there worth defending. There's symbolism worth destroying. Iskar's eyes glittered. If we let void-touched forces claim Vire's ancestral home, it sends a message that his corruption lives on, that his rebellion succeeded even in death. Then we don't let them claim it, Arik straightened. We fortify Thornhold, draw them into a defensive battle on ground of our choosing, and end this before it spreads further. And if we can't kill them with conventional weapons? Canis asked. Every eye turned to Rhea. She felt the weight of their expectation like a physical pressure. They wanted her to be the solution again, to summon her power and erase the problem the way she'd erased Vire. But the memory of that night still haunted her. The exhaustion, the sense of burning from inside out, the razor-thin edge between salvation and destruction. I can try, she said quietly, but I won't promise miracles. The void it's not something you defeat with raw power. It's hunger itself. Emptiness that consumes everything it touches. But you banished Vire, Theron pressed. Surely you can do the same to his followers. Vire was one man. This is 200 soldiers spread across miles of territory, each one a separate point of corruption. Rhea met the king's gaze. If I try to open enough rifts to banish them all simultaneously, the strain could kill me. Or worse, It could tear holes in reality that never close. Then we use conventional forces as the primary assault, Arik decided, and reserve your power for the strongest concentrations of corruption, surgical strikes instead of overwhelming force. It was a reasonable plan, a smart plan, and Rhea hated every part of it because it meant going back into battle, risking the fragile control she'd spent a month building, possibly dying in the process of cleaning up someone else's mess. But she nodded anyway, because what other choice was there? The next 2 days passed in frantic preparation. Theron drilled soldiers in anti-magic tactics, teaching them to recognize void corruption and strike at weak points in ethereal armor. Iskara coordinated supply lines, ensuring the forces heading to Thornhold Keep would have everything needed for an extended siege. And Rhea trained until her hand shook and her vision blurred, pushing her magical capacity to its limits under the scholar's watchful supervision. On the morning of departure, Mira appeared in Rhea's chambers with a package wrapped in simple cloth. "From Lady Margrave," the servant girl explained. "She said you'd need proper armor if you're riding into battle." Rhea unwrapped the bundle and found herself holding a suit of leather armor dyed deep silver, reinforced with steel plates at the vital points. It was beautiful work, functional and elegant in equal measure, sized perfectly to her frame. "I can't accept this," Rhea protested. "It's too—" "Lady Margrave's granddaughter is alive because of you," Mira cut her off gently. "She'd be offended if you refused. Besides," the girl smiled, "you can't save the kingdom in a borrowed dress." The armor fit like it had been made for her body specifically, which it probably had been. Rhea caught her reflection in the mirror and barely recognized herself, no longer the ragged fugitive or the uncertain girl playing at nobility, but something harder. A warrior who'd learned that running wasn't always the answer. King Arik was waiting in the courtyard with 500 mounted soldiers, the dawn light painting their armor in shades of gold and copper. He wore full battle gear, the ceremonial crown replaced with a simple circlet of steel that held his hair back from his face. "Ready?" he asked as Rhea mounted the horse they'd assigned her, a gray mare with gentle eyes and surprising strength. "No, but I'm coming anyway." His slight smile suggested he understood completely. They rode out through the eastern gate as the city was waking, passing the same refugees they'd sheltered days before. People lined the streets to watch them leave, some cheering, others silent and worried. An old woman pressed a charm into Rhea's hand as she passed, a simple carved wolf meant to bring courage and protection. "Thank you," Rhea said, tucking it into her armor. "Bring them back," the woman replied. "All of them." It was an impossible request. Soldiers died in battle. That was the nature of war, even wars against supernatural corruption. But Rhea nodded anyway, making a promise she wasn't certain she could keep. The ride to Thornhold Keep took 3 days of hard travel through terrain that grew progressively more desolate. Vyer's lands had been prosperous once, but 3 years of neglect following his treason had turned fertile fields into overgrown wilderness. Villages stood empty, their inhabitants fled to safer territories. Orchards had gone wild, fruit rotting on untended branches, and everywhere signs of recent violence. Burned barns, scattered belongings, dark stains on the roads that could only be blood. "They're herding people toward the keep," Theron observed on the second night, studying tracks and burn patterns. "Not killing everyone they encounter, just enough to spread fear and drive the survivors into a central location." "Why?" Iskara asked. Rhea knew the answer before anyone spoke it aloud. "Sacrifice. The void feeds on death and despair. If they're gathering people at Thornhold, it's not to claim territory, it's to fuel a ritual." "What kind of ritual?" "The kind that could tear a permanent rift into our world." Rhea's hands tightened on her reins. "Vyer tried to activate my power during the blood moon eclipse. He failed because I fought back, because the ritual was incomplete. But if his followers have enough victims, enough death to power the working, they could finish what he started," Arik finished grimly. "Open a gate to the void itself." "Can they do that without you?" Theron demanded. "Without the Rain bloodline?" "I don't know, maybe. The void doesn't care about bloodlines or ancient magic. It cares about hunger, desire, an opening it can pour through." Rhea stared at the dark horizon where Thornhold Keep waited. If they're willing to sacrifice enough people, they might create that opening themselves. They rode faster after that, pushing the horses to their limits. On the afternoon of the third day, Thornhold Keep came into view. A massive fortress built into the side of a mountain, its walls carved from living stone, its towers reaching toward a sky that seemed darker here, as if light itself struggled to penetrate whatever corruption had taken root. And surrounding the keep, visible even from miles away, were the void touched. They stood in perfect formation around the fortress walls, hundreds of them, completely still. Waiting. Their armor bore Vyre's colors, but the men wearing it were no longer fully human. Even from this distance, Rhea could see the wrongness. Movements too fluid, shadows that didn't match the sun's angle, eyes that reflected light like an animal's. Defensive positions, Arik ordered quietly. Archers to the high ground. Cavalry ready to charge on my signal. And someone get me a count of hostages. The scouts returned within the hour with grim news. Approximately 300 civilians were trapped inside the keep, held in the Great Hall under guard by void-touched soldiers. The ritual preparation had already begun, circles drawn in blood on the stone floor, symbols that hurt to look at directly, a pulsing darkness gathering at the hall's center. We have maybe 6 hours before they complete it, the lead scout reported. After that, we're all dead, Rhea finished. Along with everyone for 100 miles in every direction when the void breaks through. Arik studied the keep's defenses, his expression calculating. A direct assault would be suicide. Those walls are designed to withstand siege weapons we don't have, and even if we breached them, fighting void-touched soldiers in close quarters would slaughter us, Theron agreed. We need another option. There is one. Rhea spoke before she could talk herself out of it. I go in alone. Draw their attention. While they're focused on me, your forces breach from the rear, evacuate the hostages, and fall back. Absolutely not, Arik said immediately. It's the only way. It's suicide. Maybe. Rhea met his gaze steadily. But if I don't try, 300 people die and the void claims our world. Those are the options. I'd rather die trying to prevent it than live knowing I could have stopped it. Silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of impossible choices. If you go in there, Arik said finally, you're not going alone. Your Majesty, I'm not debating this, Rhea. His voice carried absolute authority. You'll need someone to watch your back, to pull you out if the magic overwhelms you. I've seen what happens when you push too hard. I won't let you burn yourself to ash for people who 5 weeks ago wanted you exiled. Those people are also the ones who just made you armor and called you the Silver Hand, Iskara added quietly. You're not the fugitive anymore, Rhea. You're one of us, and we protect our own. The simple acceptance of it, of her place in this kingdom she'd spent years hiding from, hit Rhea like a physical blow. She blinked back sudden tears, refusing to let them fall in front of 500 watching soldiers. Fine, she managed, but we move fast. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. Get in, disrupt the ritual, get the hostages out. Agreed. Arik turned to his commanders. Theron, you're in charge of the evacuation. The moment you see us breach the Great Hall, move. Iskara, coordinate the retreat route. I want every civilian on the road to the capital within 10 minutes of extraction. Orders flowed like water after that, soldiers moving into position with practiced efficiency. Rhea found herself checking and rechecking her weapons. The knife at her belt, the magic thrumming under her skin, the wolf charm tucked against her heart, while the sun crept toward the horizon. As twilight gathered, Arik appeared at her side. Second thoughts? Thousands. You? Too many to count. He adjusted his sword belt. But we're doing this anyway because someone has to, and we're the ones crazy enough to volunteer. Is that what this is? Volunteering? What else would you call it? Rhea thought about it. Redemption, maybe, for both of us. His expression softened. What do you need redemption for? Running, hiding, letting fear control me for 3 years while people suffered because of Vyre's ambitions. She met his gold eyes. What about you? Not seeing the threat sooner, not stopping Vyre before he corrupted his own followers, not protecting Lisa when she came to me with the truth. He looked toward the keep. We all carry ghosts, Rhea. The question is whether we let them haunt us or whether we use them as fuel to do better. They moved as the last light faded from the sky. two figures in silver and steel approaching a fortress of corruption and death. The void-touch soldiers watched their approach with empty eyes, tracking movement but not reacting. Rhea could feel the wrongness radiating from them, the sense of puppets animated by will, not their own. "Can you tell if they're still human inside?" Auric asked quietly. She reached out with her void sight and immediately recoiled. "No, whatever they were is gone. The void consumed it, left only hunger and Vire's final commands." "Then we're not killing people. We're ending their suffering." It was a small comfort, but Rhea clung to it anyway. They reached the keep's main entrance without resistance, the void touch parting to let them through like water around stone. Inside, the corruption intensified, walls weeping black ichor, torches burning with cold flame, the air itself thick with wrongness that made breathing difficult. The great hall's doors stood open, inviting them into the heart of darkness. Rhea and Auric exchanged one last look, then stepped through together. The hall was vast, built to host hundreds of guests during Vieira's reign. Now it held 300 terrified civilians huddled in the center, surrounded by void-touched guards, and the massive ritual circle drawn in blood and worse things. At the circle's center stood a figure in robes that seemed to shift and change, impossible to focus on directly. "Welcome, Silverhand." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, harmonizing with itself like a chorus of the damned. "We've been waiting for you." Rhea's blood ran cold. This wasn't a mindless puppet following Vire's commands. This was something else. Something that had retained intelligence even as the void consumed it. "Who are you?" she demanded. The figure's hood fell back, revealing a face she recognized from council portraits. Lord Harlan, or what remained of him. His throat bore the killing wound from the archives, but he stood anyway, animated by corruption and dark purpose. "You killed me," Harlan said in that awful multi-voice. "Drove Vire mad with your defiance, forced him to strike at allies in his paranoia. But death freed me, freed all of us. Now we serve a greater master than any petty king." "The void has no masters," Rhea said, "only victims." "Then let us be glorious in our victimhood." Harlan gestured, and the void-touched guards raised their weapons. "Your power will complete what Vire started. Your blood will open the gate. And when the void floods through, it will consume this poisoned world and remake it in perfect, empty darkness." "Over my dead body." Harlan smiled with teeth that had grown too sharp. "That's exactly the plan." The guards attacked. Auric met them with his sword, steel flashing in the cold torchlight. He moved with brutal efficiency, cutting down void-touched soldiers with strikes aimed at vital points. Throat, heart, joints. They fell, but slowly, corruption holding them together even as life fled. Rhea focused on the ritual circle, summoning power carefully, methodically, the way the scholars had taught her. A rift opened above the blood-drawn symbols, small and controlled, disrupting the energy flow. The darkness at the circle's center flickered and writhed. "Clever," Harlan acknowledged, "but futile. You can't stop this. The ritual has been building for days. It has momentum now. Inevitability." "Nothing is inevitable." Rhea opened another rift, then another, each one carefully placed to tear apart the ritual's structure. "Especially not your twisted vision of darkness." "You say that, but I see the truth." Harlan moved closer, gliding across the floor like a shadow. "You're afraid. Afraid of your power, afraid of what you might become, afraid to fully embrace what you are. That fear makes you weak." "Fear makes me human." Rhea met his dead eyes. "Something you stopped being the moment you drank from the void." She released the rifts all at once, letting them collapse inward. The backlash tore through the ritual circle, shattering the carefully drawn symbols, disrupting the energy that had been building. The darkness screamed, an actual sound, high and terrible, that made every hostage cry out in terror. But the ritual didn't stop. "Did you think it would be that easy?" Harlan laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "The void is patient. It's been waiting at the edges of your world for eons. A few hours more means nothing." He gestured, and the void-touched guards redoubled their assault. Auric was forced back, bleeding from a dozen small wounds, his sword work growing desperate. The hostages screamed and pressed against the far wall, trapped between the battle and the ritual's dark heart. Rhea made a decision. She stopped holding back. Power flooded through her, vast and terrible and ancient, the full force of the Rain bloodline unleashed without restraint. Silver light exploded from her body, washing across the hall, touching every void-touch soldier, every shadow, every trace of corruption. And wherever it touched, the darkness simply ceased to exist. The void-touch guards collapsed, their bodies finally allowed to die without the corruption holding them together. The ritual circle cracked and shattered, its symbols burning away like paper in flame. Even Harlan staggered, his form flickering between solid and shadow. "Impossible," he whispered. "No mortal can channel that much." "I'm not doing this as a mortal." Rhea's voice harmonized with itself now, echoing with power beyond her own. "I'm doing it as the last heir of a bloodline that existed before your void, before your darkness, before anything you serve learned to hunger. And I say—" She raised both hands, and the silver light intensified until the hall blazed like a star. "Get out of my world." She tore open a rift larger than any she'd created before, larger than the one that had swallowed Vyre, a chasm in reality that led directly to the void's heart. And then, with the last of her strength, she reversed it. Instead of pulling things into the void, she pushed all of the corruption, all of the darkness, every trace of void energy that had infected this place. She shoved it back through the rift, forcing it to return to the emptiness that had spawned it. The void screamed again, raging against the expulsion, fighting to maintain its foothold in the mortal world. Rhea fought harder. Distantly, she was aware of Arik shouting something, of soldiers pouring into the hall to evacuate hostages, of Harlan's form dissolving into shadow and ash. But her focus remained on the rift, on the terrible weight of power flowing through her, on the singular purpose of cleansing this corruption from existence. The void broke first. The darkness fled back through the rift like water down a drain, taking with it every scrap of corruption, every shadow that didn't belong. Harlan's final scream echoed as his form dissolved completely, released at last from the prison of undeath. The void-touched soldiers fell silent and still, finally allowed to rest. And then the rift sealed, reality knitting itself back together with a sound like thunder. Rhea collapsed. The world swam in and out of focus, Arik's face above her, his hands checking for injuries, his voice saying her name over and over, soldiers securing the hall, escorting freed hostages to safety. The silver light fading from her skin, leaving her cold and hollow and utterly exhausted. "Did it work?" she managed to whisper. "You saved them." Arik's voice was rough with emotion. 300 people alive because of you. The void is gone. The corruption is purged. You did it, Rhea. Good. Her eyes drifted closed. That's good. She woke 3 days later in her own chambers, Mira sitting beside the bed with worried eyes and a fresh pot of tea. The servant girl's face transformed with relief when Rhea's eyes opened. "You're awake! Oh, thank the stars. Everyone's been so worried." "How long?" Rhea's voice was a rasp. 3 days. The healer said you burned through your life force again, but not as badly as before. They think you're learning to pace yourself. Mira helped her sit up, adjusting pillows. "The king's been asking after you every hour. Should I tell him you're awake?" "Give me 10 minutes to look less like a corpse." Mira grinned. "I'll give you 15. Arik arrived exactly 15 minutes later, looking remarkably better than he had in the Great Hall. The small wounds had been tended, and he'd traded battle gear for simple clothes that made him look less like a king and more like a man. "You're alive," he said, settling into the chair beside her bed. "Disappointed?" "Terrified. When you collapsed, I thought—" He stopped, jaw clenching. "I thought I'd broken my promise to Lysa, that I'd let another Calder sister die. But you didn't." Rhea reached out, squeezing his hand. "I'm here. I'm alive. And according to Mira, 300 other people are too." "They're calling you the Void Breaker now," Arik said with a slight smile. "The silver hand who shattered darkness itself. Songs are already being written." "That's horrifying." "That's fame." His expression grew serious. "Rhea, what you did at Thornhold, it wasn't just powerful, it was transformative. The nobles who wanted you exiled are silent now. The ones who feared you are starting to see you as a protector. You've proven yourself beyond any doubt. So what happens now? Now, he stood, moving to the window. Now the kingdom rebuilds. The void corruption is purged, but the damage it caused, the burned villages, the displaced families, the trauma, that takes time to heal. Months, probably. Maybe years. And me? Where do I fit in that healing? Arik turned back to face her. Wherever you choose. The council seat is still yours if you want it, or the archives, or the training yards, or... He hesitated. Or you could leave. Return to the forest if that's what you need. I won't stop you. Rhea thought about it. Thought about the peace of the wilderness, the simplicity of survival, the freedom of answering to no one but herself. A month ago, she would have chosen that without hesitation. But she wasn't the person she'd been a month ago, or even 3 days ago. I think, she said slowly, I'd like to stay. Help with the rebuilding. Maybe teach other people with dormant bloodlines how to control their power safely. She met his gaze. Someone has to make sure the next generation doesn't make Vyre's mistakes. The smile that crossed Arik's face was brilliant and genuine. I was hoping you'd say that. Over the following weeks, the kingdom transformed. The refugees returned to their villages with royal support to rebuild. The void-touched soldiers were given proper burials, their names recorded so their families could grieve. And Rhea, the girl who'd spent 3 years hiding from the world, stepped fully into the light. She took the council seat Arik had offered, using her voice to advocate for the powerless, the forgotten, the people who survived on the margins the way she had. She worked with the scholars to develop training programs for anyone who showed signs of magical ability, creating safe spaces to learn control instead of fear. And slowly, carefully, she began teaching others to recognize and resist void corruption, turning her hard-won knowledge into protection for the next generation. The court's attitude shifted. Lord Canis apologized publicly for his earlier hostility. Lady Margrave adopted Rhea as an honorary granddaughter, showering her with invitations to family gatherings and unsolicited advice about court politics. Even Lord Theron mellowed, occasionally asking her opinion on military matters and actually listening to her answers. But the most significant change was internal. Rhea stopped jumping at shadows, stopped sleeping with weapons in reach, stopped planning escape routes from every room she entered. The survival instincts that had kept her alive for 3 years slowly loosened their grip, replaced by something she'd almost forgotten existed. Trust. Not blind trust, she'd learned that lesson too well to ever forget it, but the cautious, growing trust of someone learning that not everyone with power intended to abuse it, that some promises were meant to be kept, that family could be found in unexpected places. On the anniversary of Vyre's banishment, the kingdom held a remembrance ceremony for those lost to his corruption. Rhea stood beside King Arik on the palace balcony, watching as thousands gathered in the square below to light candles and share memories. Lisa would be proud of you, Arik said quietly, of who you've become. Rhea touched the wolf charm she still wore under her formal robes. I hope so. She died trying to protect people who didn't even know they needed protecting. I'm just trying to honor that. You're doing more than honoring it, you're living it. He gestured to the crowd below. Every person down there knows your story. The girl who ran, who survived, who came back and saved them all. You've given them hope that even in the darkest times, courage matters. Courage and a terrifying amount of magical power. Courage first, Arik corrected gently. The power just made it effective. As the sun set and the candles below multiplied into a sea of light, Rhea felt something settle in her chest, not quite healing because some wounds never fully closed, but acceptance. She'd lost her sister, lost 3 years to fear and hiding, lost the innocence of believing the world was fundamentally just. But she'd gained something too, a purpose, a place. People who saw her not as a threat or a weapon, but as someone worth protecting and worth believing in. What are you thinking? Arik asked. Rhea smiled, and it felt genuine. That I spent so long trying to disappear, I almost forgot what it felt like to be seen. And now? Now I think I'm ready to be visible, to stand in the light instead of the shadows. She looked at the king beside her, this man who'd kept his promise even when it would have been easier to break it. Thank you for finding me, for not giving up even when I gave you every reason to. Thank your sister, he said. I was just keeping a promise. You're the one who turned it into something more. Below, the crowd began to sing, the same folk song Rhea had heard that first night on the palace roof about silver light and courage in darkness. But now new verses had been added, telling the story of a girl who faced the void and won, who turned fear into strength and survival into purpose. Rhea closed her eyes and let the music wash over her, carrying away the last remnants of the fugitive she'd been. When she opened them again, she was looking at the future, vast and uncertain and full of possibilities that didn't involve running or hiding or fighting just to survive another day. She was the Silver Hand, the Void Breaker, the last heir of House Rain. But more importantly, she was Rhea Calder, a girl who'd learned that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was stop disappearing and let yourself be found. And standing beside a king who'd proven that some promises were worth keeping, surrounded by a kingdom that had learned to see her as more than just her power, Rhea finally allowed herself to believe in something she'd thought lost forever. Home. Not the physical place, though the palace had become that too, but the feeling of belonging, of being part of something larger than herself. Of knowing that when the darkness came again, and it always did, she wouldn't face it alone. The candles burned through the night, 10,000 points of light pushing back the shadows. And at the palace's heart, a girl who'd tried so hard to vanish stood visible at last, no longer running from her destiny, but embracing it with both hands. The frontier forests would always be there if she needed them. The survival skills would never fully fade. But Rhea Calder was done hiding. She was ready to live.